Just about 23 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock, welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Now, the non-governmental organization Free the Slaves convened a Caribbean forum for stakeholders in the regional anti-modern slavery movement in February. As a follow-up to the forum, there will be a free virtual training session for civil society organizations as part of its Community Liberation Initiative Toolkit, which will commence in October. And so joining us to talk more about it this morning is Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for Free the Slaves, Mr. Adrian Alexander. Mr. Alexander, good morning.
Good morning, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
Now, the only thing I know, unfortunately, about Free the Slaves is that it's an NGO. So tell us more about the organization.
Certainly. Well, Free the Slaves was established in the year 2000. And of course, we've been around for 23 years. Most of our work has been in regions outside of the U.S., even though the organization is based in the U.S. So we have partners in East and Central Africa, West Africa, Asia, the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa, Europe, and of course here in the Caribbean.
Yeah. When was the organization made aware of human trafficking?
Well, actually, it was established because of that awareness. As many of the viewers would know, slavery has not gone away. In the 1800s, it was abolished legally, but it didn't go away. The intent of Free the Slaves is to attack the conditions that allow modern slavery to persist. If we legalize something or make something illegal, it doesn't make it go away. But the conditions that allow it to persist are the ones that are political, they're social, they're economic, sometimes cultural. And those are the things that we are tackling because it's far more sustainable.
Does that fall under the umbrella of modern slavery, or can you provide us with a sort of definition or an understanding of what modern slavery looks like?
Sure, Kimberly. Modern slavery is an umbrella terminology. It's not been legally defined, and therefore it encompasses things like human trafficking, forced labor, child labor. Many of the viewers may have heard about the Global Estimates on Modern Slavery. That's a document that's published every few years. So the last publication was back in 2018 or 2016. And over the period of 5 years, and especially exacerbated by COVID-19, it went up from 40 million to 50 million persons globally estimated to be in some form of modern slavery.
What is the organization doing to bring awareness, and what has it done in the past, and what is it doing now?
Certainly. We focus not only on awareness, because sometimes, you make people aware of something, but it doesn't lead to change.
Or action, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So just borrowing from that terminology, as you mentioned, from awareness to action is the theme of the Trinidad and Tobago National Plan of Action. We look at things across a broader spectrum. So for example, not only do we liaise with policymakers to change laws and influence better policy, but we also look at engaging with local communities, and that's where the change really takes place, Kimberly. Ensuring that at community level, the stakeholders are empowered. A lot of people, just like those of us in media and so many other places, we want to do something, but we don't know what to do.
Yes.
And therefore, we bring that knowledge and that education through our Community Liberation Initiative Toolkit. We also look at research, because sometimes you may be trying to solve a problem based on 20-year-old research. So we are continually upgrading. Our research initiative for the Caribbean is going to be launched in the next couple of months. So hopefully I'll be able to share some more about that with you on another occasion.
Of course.
And of course, we're looking at the issue of how do we influence change across the board. So we have our 4 pillars that we utilize. Here in the Caribbean, we've recently entered the Southern Caribbean space, I would say. In the Northern Caribbean, we've been in Haiti and the Dominican Republic for over 15 years. And we've seen how in those various communities, different cultures, different needs, using the CLI toolkit has been quite effective. So in Haiti, there's the Restovic movement with child domestic servitude. In the Dominican Republic, there was a lot of child sex trafficking. And therefore, we can see how utilizing those strategies for Trinidad and Tobago, where there's a mixture of sex trafficking and labor trafficking, can indeed be effective.
The ones that you mentioned, are those two of the key issues or concerns for our country, for our island?
They are. They are. What the UNODC's report has shown is that for our region, sex trafficking is the more prevalent form of trafficking. We also know that from let's say 2013, there were 200 or so Indonesian fishermen who floated into our territorial waters. Some of your viewers may be familiar with that. And much of that was labor trafficking. So even though we don't highlight labor trafficking, as much as we do sex trafficking, it's a lot less sexy, I guess, to engage viewers, it's still happening and it's quite prevalent.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned earlier as well was that ability to sort of change policy and change law. The conversations that you're having, is it going to be seen at a parliamentary level? Can we see a bill passed in Parliament that addresses these issues?
Well, there is an act of Parliament already, the Trafficking in Persons legislation back in 2011.
But it's a bit dated.
It is a bit dated,
Yeah.
and I'm certain that there are some amendments already being proposed.
Right.
So over the past few months, since February when we had our forum, we've had an opportunity to engage with some of these stakeholders at policy level and policy implementation level. And we're chatting with them about some of the issues. For example, if we have and we know there's a big issue of male demand for commercial sex in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
How do we tackle that more effectively? How do we look at supply chain transparency? And that may be something that may cause some people some alarm, because we want to buy cheap goods and services, but our demand for cheap goods and services may be leading to the trafficking with somebody else in another part of the world. How do we ensure that we are not contributing to that type of exploitation? And those are some of the things that we also need to explore. But beyond legislation, Kimberly, no matter how much law you have, no matter how much police you put on the streets to try to enforce the law, change doesn't happen by that. Change happens at grassroots level, and that's where we specialize.
Yeah. I want to focus a bit, Mr. Alexander, on the organizations that Free the Slaves partner with. And I say that because I know the United Nations, they as well are trying to tackle the issue of human trafficking, sex trafficking, that sort of thing. Have you had conversation with the United Nations on how we can combat this?
Correct. Several of the UN institutions functioning in the Caribbean, we've already been liaising with them. We had the IOM, International Organization for Migration. They played a key role in our forum in February. The ILO, we've been liaising with them to discuss the Alliance 8.7 Pathfinder Country Initiative for the regions. And with the UNODC, they also played a critical role in the planning as well as the execution of our regional forum. And we're also liaising with them along the same lines. How can we form a technical team in the Caribbean to approach governments to understand the benefits of not simply having a law to address trafficking in persons, but to look at the umbrella activities that we mentioned earlier about modern slavery as a whole, and to perhaps become the first Pathfinder country for the Caribbean.
Yeah. Mr. Alexander, that 8.7 Pathfinder Country Initiative, tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Alliance 8.7, sorry.
That's okay.
Is an initiative really spearheaded by the ILO. They formed the secretariat, and this is coming out of the UN SDGs. Target 8.7 of the SDGs really looks at how do we eliminate human trafficking, modern slavery, forced labor, and child labor. And of course, most of the SDGs, the target date is 2030, but for the elimination of child labor, it's 2025. That's just around the corner, Kimberly. That's just around the corner. And very often we see that countries are still working in silos to address these issues. The Pathfinder Country Initiative is really to highlight those nations that are willing to go faster, farther, and be more innovative in tackling all four of these issues. The challenge, of course, is that in the Caribbean, there is no Pathfinder country as yet. So one of our tasks is really to try to convince government agencies to delve more into what this is. We're organizing with some of our colleagues in different parts of the world, especially in Commonwealth territories that are Pathfinder countries, so that we can make a presentation to the governments in our region, letting them hear from their government counterparts what this is, how it has affected and influenced the work that they're doing at government level. But it's not just government. Even though the application has to be made by a government, no government can really tackle these issues on its own. So we're looking at the participation of business, you're looking at the participation of civil society, academia, and all of these are stakeholders with whom we have already been engaging in the conversation, so that when we approach government to share that information, it's a holistic approach.
Of course. Now, you mentioned civil society, and it's key because that upcoming training session that you have is focused on civil society organizations. Correct. How is Free the Slaves going to strengthen civil society to get that action that we've been talking about?
Certainly. We use our CLI toolkit, as I mentioned. This has been in place for more than 15 years. We've used it in Nepal, in India, in Senegal. It's also being used now in Mauritius. We are seeing, Mauritania rather. We're seeing a lot of activity in Ghana and Nigeria. And across the spectrum, adapting it to the local needs, we're seeing the benefits. So the outcomes would be things like higher levels of education, in the eyes of the community, because vulnerability is at the core of modern slavery. Even though the definition of human trafficking would include things like deception and abduction and things like that as means by which people are enslaved, essentially they're vulnerable. And vulnerability may be that they're not aware of the risks of taking up some of these offers.
Yes.
They're not aware of their own rights. Some people assume that because I owe a debt to someone, that person can tell me exactly what to do and keep me in a form of enslavement until that debt is paid. But that's not the law.
And before you go, Mr. Alexander, if any average citizen is looking on right now and they want to be a part of the movement, or they want to even initiate or help initiate that change, how can they get involved?
Certainly, they can visit our website. We have a dedicated page for Trinidad and Tobago now.
Nice.
So they can go to freetheslaves.net/Trinbago. So people would know that term, and they would get a sense of the work that we are doing, the work that we are about to do. There's a flyer for the training. We're having an information session on the 29th of September. So we're encouraging people to sign up for that to get more information about how they can become involved in their community.
Nice. Mr. Alexander, pleasure to have you on the show with us this morning.
Nice
Really
to meet
opened
you.
up my eyes to a lot, and I hope it did for our viewers as well. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Kimberly. My pleasure.
And that, of course, was Mr. Adrian Alexander, the Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for the non-governmental organization Free the Slaves. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. Stay with us.